Hello everyone and welcome to Tennis Trade Talk, our second edition of this year as we look towards the US Open, the fourth of our majors for 2023. And whilst Wimbledon is often referred to as the classical recital, the US Open's obviously a bit more of a rock concert, and we've had all of the lead-up tournaments and we're ready to go. Darren Parkin is my name. Steve Quick, who provides our previews via Ace Previews all through the tennis year, joins me again. And Steve, nice to have this one around. Always exciting, the US Open.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's always exciting to have this as that fourth Grand Slam. It sometimes throws up some more interesting results, I think, compared to some of the other slams. So looking forward to getting stuck in and chatting all about the fortnight ahead.
Yeah, and that's spot on in terms of what the US Open has done. Obviously, we haven't had a back-to-back winner on the men's side since Roger Federer won 5 in a row between 2004 and 2008, and I was looking at it a bit during the week too, that the defending champion hasn't made the final since 2016. So that's the challenge that sits in front of Carlos Alcaraz. We've had a lot of first-time Grand Slam winners at the US Open in recent years. Obviously, Dominic Thiem, Daniil Medvedev and Carlos Alcaraz. Even back in time, Andy Murray had his breakthrough event here as well. So it seems to throw up surprises every year, this event.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there can be a couple of reasons perhaps for that. You look at some of the more successful players, if they've been successful through the first 9 months of the season that we're looking at, they're maybe a little bit tired. But obviously, one of the big things to consider across those last couple of new Grand Slam winners is that Novak Djokovic wasn't always here. Mm-hmm. So he's here, he's back at Flushing Meadows, so it'll be interesting to see how that shapes things in terms of the draw for the fortnight.
Absolutely. Obviously, we had the pandemic year, and then we had the controversy with the linesman as well, with Novak Djokovic. Obviously, he was going for the year slam a couple of years ago when Daniil Medvedev got him, and obviously he can't go for that this year due to Alcaraz getting him at Wimbledon as well. And then we look at the women's side of the draw, which has thrown up a few surprises as well, but we'll touch on that in a moment. I guess your favourite US Open memories. It's been a good slam for Australians generally, but what are some of your best memories here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, to start and look at some of the ones in more recent times, I think a few people will generally kind of consider the Dominic Thiem, Alexander Zverev final maybe not living up to the expectation of many other finals over the years. But I think, for the chaos that came with that particular matchup, Alexander Zverev burst out of the blocks, looked like he was going to win his first Grand Slam title. Dominic Thiem fights his way back, and that fifth set, the cramping, both physically and potentially mentally as well, that was just one of the strangest spectacles I've seen. But I think, given the pressure and everything that showed in that moment, it shows how much, you're looking at Novak Djokovic against Medvedev, a couple of years ago, the pressure that it takes, when you're trying to leap over that hurdle for the first time and win at the top level. At that one, I think, is one that really stands out to me. But looking maybe back to about a decade ago, Juan Martín del Potro, I think, is a player that we wish we would have seen him be able to stay at the top of his game for the entirety of his career. Obviously, injuries, particularly those knee issues, were a major thing. But watching him match up against Roger Federer in that final all those years ago, I think, is one that really stands out for me. But how about you? Are there any particular standouts?
Yeah, obviously when I was a kid, Leighton Hewitt winning against Pete Sampras in his own backyard as a 20-year-old. Sam Stosur, obviously it was the 10th anniversary of September 11, so it was a big weekend in New York, and Serena, the crowd favourite, and all of the drama that came with that. It was clearly, I would say, the performance of Sam's career. And even Cilic Nishikori, when we had those two epic upsets in the semis, where Nishikori beats Djokovic and Cilic beats Federer, and you end up with the final that nobody expected that year.
Yeah, and I think, look, one to consider, it's not really that big breakthrough moment, for example, but I think, Daniil Medvedev, when he did go on that run and he almost adopted that villain role. I remember, it was a late night match against, I think it was Feliciano Lopez, and the crowd turned on him, and then he really, was eating that up, I think, in the post-match interview as well, and really started to adopt that villain role, which is something that a lot of players don't like, but he's really been able to lean into it well over the last couple of years, and it's worked in his favour.
And he's, again, a fascinating case study, a two-time finalist at this event, obviously lost a 5-setter to Nadal and then beat Djokovic a couple of years after that. We know that he hasn't quite, for whatever reason, been the same player since that Australian Open final at the start of last year, but how have you assessed the lead-in form? I guess the highlight of the lead-in form was Djokovic and Alcaraz meeting again in Cincinnati, but what's been your summary of it?
I mean, it's been a real mixed bag, I think, across the course of all of the hardcourt tournaments in North America. Normally we do see that player that will, kind of take control, I guess, of the lead up, and there's that real form player coming in. Obviously, Novak didn't play a lot of tennis, but when he did, that was a unbelievable match with Carlos Alcaraz. You look at the titles to Dan Evans, Yannick Sinner. Taylor Fritz was able to beat Vukic in the final, about a month ago. So I think it's an interesting case, I think, here of, when we're looking at the lead-in, the pinnacle is what we saw with Alcaraz and Djokovic. But there are some players who have been able to, at least, particularly in Alcaraz's instance, he's been pushed by a number of players, beaten by Tommy Paul. There's a few players who have shown that they can match it across the best of three for long periods. Now we go to Flushing Meadows, we're going over best of five. Now it's going to see, who's going to be able to do that over the longer period.
Yeah, even Thompson and Purcell taking sets off Alcaraz as well. On the women's side, obviously, Coco Gauff was the story, beating Swiatek and having a great run through. And we've always kind of thought that her time was sort of coming. Do you feel that it's on the cusp?
I think, we're getting closer. I don't think the draw's been particularly kind to Coco here, finding her way into Iga's quarter. But I think, the lead-up form of not only herself, but also Jessica Pegula, looking at, those key North American tournaments and the ability for the Americans to be able to win that, it's going to hold them in good stead. And, we know they're going to have a very, very big crowd behind them as well. So looking forward to seeing what they can both provide, over the next fortnight.
Yeah, and Jessica Pegula spoke about how she was struggling a bit to, struggling with confidence and form, and how quickly that did turn around for them. We'll take a look also at some of the Australians. Obviously, Sands, Nick Kyrgios, we'll talk about that a bit later on. But yeah, plenty of US Open memories, and it's been a chaotic tournament, I think, over recent times. We'll turn our attention to the markets now and what they're telling us. And understandably, on the men's side, all of the rage is with the two guys we've mentioned. Novak Djokovic, he's had a surprisingly poor record in US Open finals. He's 3-6, so he's almost got to the final at the US Open as often as he has in Australia. But obviously, his record in Australia has been flawless. For whatever reason, he's found this a bit of a stumbling block.
Yeah, and I do wonder if maybe it is that fatigue across the course of a season. He's been so successful for so many years in a row now. That once you do get to that, late August time period in the season, you've played and you've won a lot. Maybe that there is that little bit of a physical, cumulative fatigue over a long period. Whereas when he's in Australia, that's what he's priming his entire off season for. He's ready, he's fresh. So I guess that could be something that is worth considering. But I think, looking at the market there, obviously we've got Novak at the top there. I think it was pretty even billing himself and Alcaraz before that Cincinnati final. But I think showing, playing well over 3 hours, tough conditions, I think that was a real statement from Novak, particularly after what took place at Wimbledon.
So no best of five, still a factor. Obviously, he had a couple of records broken snapped by Alcaraz at Wimbledon. I think he was 102 straight matches after winning the first set. He won 8 5-setters in a row. We know he's 74-5 in slam matches since the start of 2020, losing one on a default. But with Alcaraz, we spoke about how the defending champ hasn't made a final since 2016. How important is this tournament for him? We know he's likely to leave a great legacy on the sport. He's backed up his US Open by winning Wimbledon. And this is obviously what the great players do. They come back again and again and again, and that's the challenge for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we look at it, obviously he was able to get the win last year. Novak wasn't here. He took advantage of that and was able to beat Casper Ruud there in the final. Is a little bit different here. Obviously, he's been playing more tennis this year in the lead up. Again, talking about that fatigue, he had, he made and won the Wimbledon final. So he's played a lot more tennis. And looking at the lead up form, I think when you look at some of those matches, we talked about Max Purcell, Jordan Thompson, and the like, really pushing Alcaraz in some of these lead up tournaments. And, he did lose to Tommy Paul. It's an interesting one of, I thought he would probably be a little bit more dominant, and whether, we are starting to see, he's still very young, comparatively speaking. We've been talking about players who are, going to be able to be part of that changing of the guard from the big three, and he's overtaken all of them, and he's basically got that entire next generation on his shoulders. So, it's going to be interesting, I think, to see how he goes. There's a couple of tricky matchups, that are really going to push him and make sure he's playing well through the first week. But obviously, as a number one seed, it's he's got the best draw and is well and truly as far away from Novak as possible. So that's always an advantage.
Collision course for the final. Of the others, obviously, it's pretty much friendless beyond those two, and even at the time of us talking, it's drifted a bit. So Alcaraz 286 out to 305, Djokovic 250 into 224, but Medvedev out to 12s. Then Sinner at 1850, and the market's suggesting forget the rest. Obviously, Zverev and Tsitsipas in the 50s, Holger Rune at 65, Casper Ruud, who's frequent finalist at $85. Can you mount a case for anybody in those double figures, Medvedev, Sinner and beyond?
It's a great question. It's tough. I think it's tough to make a really, really strong case. I think the best case when you are looking at those prices is look to players in the draw that are as far away from both of Alcaraz and Djokovic as possible. I think when you look at the quarters of both of those two players, I think when we look at Alcaraz, there are some tougher players in that section of the draw. So we've got Yannick Sinner, we've got Alexander Zverev. These are players who are more than capable. And I'd almost give Zverev potentially the edge against Sinner in a best of 5, depending on what the weather throws up at Flushing Meadows. So I'd probably steer clear of them for now and look to the second and third quarters to see if there is anyone that you could maybe make a case for. I'll be a little bit ambitious and make a case for Tommy Paul around the $160 mark. I think he's shown his ability to be able to match it against some of the top players. Semi-final at the Australian Open. He's shown that he can play over the best of 5, and he's a pretty capable return of serve given his size and his ability on his own serve. So here's one I think to consider in that little pocket there. And I think Francis Tiafoe, if he can regain some form and confidence, there are some two players in the middle there that really do stand out.
We saw Tiafoe have a great run this time last year. On the women's side of the draw, the usual names up towards the top, although we spoke about Coco Gauff, she's injected herself right into that conversation. So Iga Swiatek, defending champion, 355. Sabalenka has shortened a little bit in the last couple of days, 660 into 620 as second favourite. Then Coco Gauff has gone past Rybakina into the third line of betting at 920. Rybakina 11s, Pegula 1150. So they're the top 5 in the market. And then you get a couple of recent finalists in Ons Jabeur, Mulkova, Vondrousova obviously won Wimbledon as well. And then it gets pretty long odds after that. But how are you seeing the women's contenders?
Yeah, I think when you look at Iga, I think she's had a very similar lead up, I guess, to Alcaraz in that she's then been finding herself challenged by some players that you perhaps weren't expecting. But, I think it's been a big breakthrough for the likes of Pegula and Coco Gauff in terms of their ability to get over that hurdle and not just challenge Iga in terms of these matches, but to be able to actually go on and win and then go on and win tournaments. I think when we look at it and we look at the prices, obviously Sabalenka is the beneficiary of when you consider the big 3. She's by herself in the bottom half and the other 2 are up the top. So I think when you look at her form and you look at the draw that's opened up for her, I think it's a great opportunity for her to be able to make another deep run. Obviously, we saw how impressive she was at the Australian Open, but here she's had a couple of hurdles in recent years where we thought she was probably going to be able to go on and win the title and has stumbled towards the latter end of the tournament. So looking to see a more improved performance from her. But I think as we said, I think we spoke a little bit before Wimbledon as well. It's trying to find players in there that you've got players who can, red line and almost play lights out tennis, and on their day they can beat anyone. It's just about whether they can do it for 7 wins in a row across this fortnight. Yeah,
Madison Keys has always been, for example, that type of player who can be very difficult to beat. Kvitova, those sorts of players. But Svitolina had a great comeback in the last couple of majors. Bencic played very well against Swiatek at Wimbledon and had match points in that match, so her form's been all right. Both Svitolina and Bencic made those runs to the semis a few years ago in 2019 when Andreescu won the title. Can you see either of them emulating deep runs?
I think it's tricky. I think on the form that they've displayed here, I think, definitely a challenge to push to the second week. Whether we're talking about the last 4, I think is a different question again. I think, of the players that you've listed off there, I do think one to maybe keep a sneaky eye on is Madison Keys. I think, she's triple figures in the market at the moment on the exchange and has that potential. And we've seen that before. She's a former finalist, lost to Sloane Stephens in the final all those years ago. Could potentially make a little bit of a run. But I think I'm just excited to see, particularly with this tournament, and when we compare it to the French Open and Wimbledon, we've had these players break through. It's not just the top names. We've been able to see, Vondrousova, even Mahova at Roland Garros to be able to make that push to the final and really challenge. It's nice to see these players now starting to have that self-belief in their game. So it's a really open, I think, fortnight, particularly for the women's. And it might be a case of trying to find that player below Swiatek in the outrights, but maybe setting an in-play back bet for Iga perhaps thinking that she might find trouble somewhere along the way, and she's sitting around in that $3 to $4 range at the moment. But she drops a first set somewhere in that first week, you might be able to get that kind of $5, $6 and try and round out your book a little bit more.
Question without notice, are the balls still different? I know Ash Barty's team often used to talk about how the balls were slightly different at the US Open, which never used to suit her.
No, I think that it's changed back now to be the same.
Yeah.
But it will be interesting to see. And the conditions as well, have varied a little bit over the last couple of years, have sometimes been on the slower side. There's been some talk through qualifying that maybe it's a little bit quicker, but it's still kind of that medium pace. So look, it should suit a lot of players. But yeah, it'll be a fascinating fortnight, and particularly seeing the likes of Caroline Wozniacki coming back as a wild card and returning. She's obviously been sitting there for the last couple of years going, you know what, I think I can beat most of these people if I can find my way back to the level. And her fitness has never been an issue. So it's been interesting to see that little addition. And I wonder if there will be anyone else who'll be making their way back in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, we saw Kim Clijsters come back, get sort of curtailed by the pandemic a little bit, and then she's obviously went back into retirement. But it'd be great to see a little bit of that. Obviously, Venus Williams gets another wild card. She hasn't retired, but obviously still kicking around. But we'll turn our attention to the Australians. Nick Kyrgios, coming off a career best year last year, has now completed the set and missed all 4 majors this year, unfortunately. So he turns 30 next year, Nick. Is there still sand in the hourglass for him, do you think?
There's not a lot,
No.
I don't think. I think our big question over the years has always been, particularly at Grand Slam level, that ability to play 7 best-of-5 matches in a row. We saw that he was able to make that Wimbledon final. There was a semi-final walkover against Nadal. He didn't have to play the strongest field through there. I don't think time is on his side. What I would like to see, I guess, as an Australian, I'm sure there's probably others out there as well, is we've seen Bernard Tomic make his way back up through the rankings in the Challenger and ITF level over the last couple of months. I'd love to see him just make his way through maybe some Australian Open qualifying and set something up for round 1 at the Australian Open. But look, I think it's going to be tough. What are your thoughts with Nick?
Yeah, you don't think he's going to play till he's 35. You
No.
think that it's only a year or 2 maybe for him. And look, he's got some natural weapons that'll just make him dangerous. But whether he can go deep enough against these real emerging young talents, whether he can compete with Sinners and Alcarazes and Medvedevs and these sorts of players remains to be seen. We know that Alex de Minaur will compete. It then comes down to weapons for him. But how do you assess the Aussies? The draw has come out, and unfortunately a couple play each other in O'Connell and Purcell. But how have they fared overall?
Look, I think starting off with Alex, obviously he's played some solid tennis in the lead up. Made a final a couple of weeks ago, lost to Yannick Sinner, and I think that match against Sinner just shows that ability. He's able to beat, I'd say, 95% of the top 100. But then you're looking at those top names and those players who have those weapons and firepower. It just becomes a little bit too much for Alex, particularly with his serve being a little bit vulnerable at times. I do think his draw is relatively solid. I think when you look at it, he should be able to make his way through to the second week, just taking a look at it and potentially, set up, I think it's a 4th round match with Daniil Medvedev, who he did beat a couple of weeks ago. But it's going to be a tough ask, I think, to make that push late. But I think it's exciting, particularly looking at that mid-range, the 40 to 100 with the men's. Is there anyone in particular that stands out of the rest of the gang?
Always, look, Purcell, obviously that good run beating Casper Ruud and a few others as well along the way. Beat Lloyd Harris, obviously not quite the same player. Beat Popperin, who then got the lucky loser and went pretty deep himself all the way to Hercags in that. But maybe Max. And Jason Kubler's, I think, a pretty honest competitor and, some tricky matches forecast for him. But I always think that he's capable.
Yep, and I think the other one of the list is probably Jordan Thompson in terms of, I think, we've seen Jordan's progression probably over the last couple of years, and he's always found himself in this point with Grand Slams or big matches, and you can see him get quite frustrated with himself and gets really down on himself. But he's looking a little bit more self-assured, I think, this year, and looks a little bit more comfortable, I guess, with his position, particularly, at the top level. And I would love to see him play best-of-5 against Carlos Alcaraz after, pushing him a couple of weeks ago. I think it'd be interesting just to see if he could make his way through to that 3rd round. I'm not expecting him to be able to win that or to push beyond, but I think it's a great sign. I think he's been able to put together a solid year. And I think it's worth mentioning with Max Purcell, the only men's player at the moment who is in the top 50 rankings for both singles and doubles. So he's been able to put it together across the spectrum, but it's been great to see this year in particular him show more of that focus towards the singles, and it's paying off.
Yeah, that Wimbledon win with Matty Ebden last year, giving him a lot of confidence. On the women's side, it's a little bit thinner, but we do get Alja Tomljanovic back, her first competitive hit out for the year. Obviously, expectations are going to be tempered because of that, but great to have her back anyway. Dasher, Storm Hunter, tough draws for them, and still quite a few Aussies in qualifying. How do you see it for the women?
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be tough. I think if you look at Dasher, that's probably you would generally say, even on the quick backup, I guess, coming back from that ACL, she's only played for, I think, about a month or two now. Potential second round with Iga is probably not the best. It's not the best draw that you could ask for, but I think it'll just be great to see her back in this back end of the year and trying to kind of push against some of these players who might be getting a little bit tired towards the end of the season, but it is going to be a tough ask. But hopefully, that some of these players who are still left alive in qualifying are able to make their way through and to be able to try and put together some points and, in some cases, stake a claim for an Oz Open wildcard.
Yeah, and we spoke about Tomljanovic last year. She obviously beat Serena en route through to that quarter-final in Serena's swan song, and obviously made the quarters at Wimbledon as well. A very talented player, but that knee issue had plagued her for most of the year. We turn to the all-important trading strategies now. Obviously, your selections will be up throughout the days for our listeners and readers to jump on and check that out. But looking long term on the men's and women's sides, what are your strategies?
Yeah, I think the first thing to look at is, if you're looking to back either of the top two names in the draw, I think Novak is the one for me. I think when you look at the draw difficulty of both players, I think Alcaraz has a few trickier matches through the kind of middle portion of the tournament compared to Novak. I think Novak's first real threat is probably Stefanos Tsitsipas in the quarterfinals where they'd meet. But I think when we look at it, and we look at Cincinnati and we look at that matchup, Alcaraz was cramping and struggling to hold the racket almost at the end of that match as well. The thought of then having to do that for another 2 sets on top of it, obviously he cramped in that matchup at Roland Garros, was able to get through and win in 5 at Wimbledon, where there's a little bit less pressure on the body.
Doesn't have
the
as
joints,
much bite
doesn't have
in the sun.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Novak is the one. I think if you're looking at the top just for a back, if you just want to then forget about it. I think if you want to make a trade, I talked about Tommy Paul a little bit earlier on. I think if you're looking at around that $160, I think he is at the moment on the exchange. Has the ability, has shown he can go deep at a Grand Slam, isn't phased by best of 5 tennis, is solid on defence and matches up against a lot of different styles relatively well. So I think he's a good one from a trading perspective because I think he will shorten as he comes in across the fortnight. And some smaller trades for some of the old guard that we thought were the original next generation. Alexander Zverev, I think, could maybe push Jannik Sinner, and I think he's got the tools to challenge Alcaraz if he is a little bit tired and isn't showing that top form through the first couple of rounds. And the other one is Andrei Rublev. I'm not off Andrei Rublev. Very rarely in the past actually have I been on Andrei Rublev at Grand Slam level, but I think from a trading perspective, when you look at his draw, falls in that Medvedev pocket of the draw as well. I think he's got the ability, and I think he's a little bit over the odds, and you can maybe make a trade and see him come into double figures across the first week in particular.
Always a good chance to get to the quarters, I think. On the women's side now, we look towards some of those strategies. Obviously, Sabalenka had her breakthrough slam at the start of the year. Do you think she can finish the year the same way?
Look, I think so. I think the draw's been quite favourable to her. I think looking at the odds of the big three at the top there, and also considering Coco Gauff as well, I think she presents as the best value at the moment. As I said before, maybe with Iga you could look to set up a back around that $5.50 to $6 mark. She's shown that she can find herself in some trouble, but is finding her way out of that trouble reasonably consistently. Struggled a little bit against Gauff and Pegula in the lead up, but I think against some of the names that she would potentially face in the first week, I think that's something you could consider. And from a trading perspective, I think Jessica Pegula is the best of the rest in terms of the draw and how that's panned out. And if you wanted to be a little bit more ambitious, a slightly smaller trade, but at the triple figures, Madison Keys, I think her draw looks reasonably solid, and she might be able to make a little bit of a run.
And has been a finalist at this major before, and can go on those runs from time to time. Of course, your tips will be up daily throughout the US Open, and we can look at some first round, second round, etc. strategies. Hopefully we can get some Aussies that push towards the second week. But Steve, it's been great fun. We look forward to doing this all the way through the Slam year and potentially a little bit later on when we get towards the finals in a couple of months' time. But it's been great to chat again.
Perfect. Thanks for having me on.
It's been Trade Talk Tennis US Open edition, and for all of those daily tips, jump on the hub. Chances are you're about to lose. For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.